Tonight, we delve into the story of the Great Train Robbery. The name itself evokes a certain image, doesn't it? A grand, brilliantly successful heist. And in many ways it was. It remains perhaps one of the most famous crimes in British history. The date was August 8, 1963. The target, the Glasgow to London Royal Mail train. And the prize, a staggering £2.6 million. In today's money, that would be the equivalent of nearly £50 million, a truly immense sum. But today, based on the records, we will delve deeper. We will look past the headlines to uncover the real story behind this legendary crime. We will see the failures, the betrayals, and the details often left out of the films. Because the popular image is a glamorized one. Super thieves, a mastermind, a flawless plan. Then came the super detective, Tommy Butler. Following long sentences and daring escapes from prison, like those of Charlie Wilson and Ronnie Biggs, public sympathy strangely often sided with the robbers. But the real story is far more complicated, far less heroic, and it is a story riddled with mistakes. Let's begin with the formation of the gang. Was there truly a single brilliant mastermind pulling the strings? The records tell us that initially, this wasn't the case. The idea actually originated from a lawyer's clerk, a man named Brian Field. A clerk, you asked? Indeed, an interesting start. It was Field who approached Gordon Goody, a known figure in the criminal underworld. Goody, in turn, brought in his own crew, known as the Bowler Hat Gang. This included names like Bruce Reynolds, Buster Edwards, Charlie Wilson, and Roy James. But they had a critical problem. They had experience with robberies. They had no expertise in a crucial area, how to actually stop a train. So what did they do? They reached out to another group, the South Coast Raiders, which included men like Tommy Wisby and Roger Corddry. This group possessed the specific knowledge they needed, how to tamper with the railway signals. It was a remarkably simple method. They would cover the green light with a glove and use a separate battery to power the red light, forcing the train to a halt. And who else joined this expanding gang? Ronnie Biggs was brought on board, as was a retired train driver they hoped would pilot the train after the hijack. However, on the night of the robbery, he would prove to be of no use. The gang then was a mixed bag. The records describe it as an odd mob firm. It was a strange alliance of criminals, petty thieves, and some who were essentially ordinary citizens. The problem was clear. The details of the plan had spread to far too many people. Now, let's go to the night of the robbery itself. The train was stopped using the fake signal, just as planned, but it was here that the first major disaster struck. In a move that was never part of the plan, the train driver, Jack Mills, was brutally attacked with an iron bar. This was a grave act of violence, and it would leave Mills with deep, lasting trauma for the rest of his life. Then, their backup plan failed. The retired driver they had brought along was unable to operate the new diesel engine. So what did they do? They forced the injured and bleeding Jack Mills to get back in the driver's seat and move the train forward to a nearby bridge. There, the looting began. Roughly 120 mailbags containing £2.6 million. The men formed a human chain, rapidly loading the sacks of cash onto waiting trucks. Everything happened with incredible speed. But where did they go from there? This brings us to the famous farmhouse, Leatherslate Farm. The plan was to lie low there for several weeks, but then came a police press conference. When the gang heard that the police were conducting a search in a 30-mile radius of the crime scene, they panicked. In their fear, they made a hasty departure. And here, Brian Field made another catastrophic error. He had been tasked with cleaning the farm, removing all traces of their presence. He failed spectacularly. Fingerprints were left everywhere, on a Monopoly board, on a ketchup bottle. Empty mailbags, the vehicles they used, everything was abandoned. And the ultimate irony, to purchase the farm in the first place, Field had used his own law firm, unwittingly handing the police a direct and easy trail to follow. During this time, another crucial development occurred, an informant. This individual, later identified by the codename Ulsterman, contacted a police officer named John Coombs within hours or days of the robbery. He provided key names, Wilson, Reynolds, and others, and also mentioned the farmhouse. This means the police's success wasn't just the result of brilliant detective work. The informant's tip, combined with a local farmer who had noticed suspicious activity at the farm, and the coincidental arrest of Roger Corddry, were the key elements that broke the case. However, serious questions were later raised about the investigation, particularly concerning the evidence. A major controversy erupted over an alleged confession by Charlie Wilson. It was claimed that the police had fabricated this statement, a practice known as verbaling. Similarly, forensic evidence, paint particles found on Gordon Goody's shoes, and paint from Bill Bull's jacket was subjected to serious doubt about its reliability. In the case of Bill Bull, it has been suggested that he may have been entirely innocent. The sentences handed down were incredibly harsh: 30 years in prison for the main conspirators, with a collective total of over 300 years. The judge justified this severity by citing the violent attack on Jack Mills. But not everyone was brought to justice. At least 3 of the robbers were never caught, nor were they ever charged. Their identities were likely known in the underworld, but they remained a secret. Were there ever suspicions of police corruption? There were whispers. One claim, made by a criminal named Fred Foreman, was that he had paid £50,000 to a police officer named Frank Williams to secure some kind of deal. These allegations were never proven, but the questions lingered. So, the outcome for most involved in this successful robbery was far from good. The romantic Robin Hood myth fades when confronted with the bitter reality. Brian Field, the man who had the initial idea, was killed in a car crash. Charlie Wilson was murdered in Spain. Buster Edwards took his own life. Roy James died during a medical trial. And Ronnie Biggs, who became the most famous fugitive after his escape, he lived as a celebrity on the run in Brazil for decades. But eventually, in poor health, he voluntarily returned to Britain and passed away in 2013. Bruce Reynolds, the man often called the mastermind, was the last to be captured. He served his sentence, wrote his autobiography, and also died in 2013. And what of the vast fortune, the £2.6 million? Most of it was simply lost. Some was lost in disputes over shares, some was stolen by associates. And then, when Britain decimalized its currency, it became nearly impossible to exchange the old banknotes. But the incident did have lasting effects. It completely revolutionized the methods of transporting cash in Britain, with security being massively tightened. It also played a significant role in forcing better cooperation and centralization among the nation's police forces. In conclusion, the Great Train Robbery, celebrated as a masterpiece of criminal planning, was in reality a tangled story of chaos, critical errors, betrayal, human tragedy, and controversial justice. It was a complex mix of planning, luck, and failure. It forces us to ask, does the legendary fame of this crime, when weighed against the tragic fates of those involved and the questions surrounding the investigation, truly match its grim reality and its real human cost? That is a question worth pondering.